Very much for having me. Unfortunately, I must start with a threat or a warning to José Manuel Anta here, because he runs a high risk of failure for this conference. In the coffee break a while ago, I read a quote by José Manuel saying, "Collaboration is the most important thing to bring all these complex pieces and people together in our industry." I guess he's right, but it reminded me instantly of one of the big failures in my own programming of conference a few years ago when I ran the Berlin-based Publishers Forum. Every year we had a kind of a theme that we wanted to propose to our audience of publishing professionals. And once I thought collaboration is really what matters now in that transformation of our sector. And guess what happened? All the speakers whom we had invited and briefed, etc., simply ignored the topic. They did their things, they sold their services, they were bright and shiny about their success stories. Not one addressed collaboration, and the workshops where we urged or we obliged people to try to speak about the topics were the least attended. That's a little bit of a problem, even more so, not just because of the pandemic, but with the pandemic. Because if we review a little bit what happened, we see that it was not the same experience of the last 2.5 years of lockdowns, of interruptions, now supply chain trouble coming out of that crisis, etc., etc., etc. It was not the same crisis for everyone. There's a huge difference between the big organizations and the small organizations, between the big markets like Spain, Germany, and small markets like Slovenia or Lithuania with 2 million or 5 million. And if Markus Dohle would stand here, or in a moment, Schumacher-Gebler of Bonnier Group in Germany, well, they really had all the possibilities to bring their act together, to optimize their value chain, to optimize their processes. I remember working with the head of production in Bonnier for that same publishing conference in Berlin a while ago. She was on my advisory board, and it was always fascinating to listen to her, what she organized, what she conceptualized 5-6 years ago in terms of managing a book value chain that is getting more and more complex. Printed books, mass paper books, e-books, audiobooks, etc., etc. It's getting more complex even now. Subscription suddenly, streaming distribution of audiobooks, putting your books and your reading on Spotify and stuff like this. If I have a small little company of a few employees, I do not have a production department whom I can ask, well, you know, that wonderful print-on-demand value chain, you reorganize our processes accordingly, and you set up a little task force for getting serious about print-on-demand, one-on-one production. And I'm very much a fan of this, I must say. I think that's crucially important, but when I have a production department of one person, handling all these materials becomes really a challenge. So the awareness of us, or Markus Dohle, same, would be shiny about the growth of the book market, his book market, because his book market is global. And there he discovers that the middle class, so the target audiences of traditional book readers, is really growing by the millions and tens of millions on a global scale. But in our markets, and even in Germany or Spain, we have different phenomena. we did a long time survey of print book sales in Germany for a decade, the decade before the pandemic. And we didn't look at value, at revenue generated, but at copies of sold books, which is a much more significant indicator and measure if your market is solid or declining. And we all know, if we are interested in numbers, that overall the numbers of copies consumed across the board is not increasing but continuously shrinking, which means that our target audiences are shrinking, which means, to come back to the production, that we need to have a lot of attention for optimizing these processes, which becomes more and more a really deep challenge for survival for the small markets, for the small companies, for the diversity in culture, for the diversity in catering to different authors, and last not least, because our audience is shrinking, in discovering new audience groups, targeting not always the same well-educated, affluent, female book lovers who are, there's even a very nasty, really very nasty saying in Germany, saying our target audiences are housewives in Stuttgart, which shows you a really very, very difficult situation. And when you are small, you are really in trouble how to overcome this. And perhaps you wonder why I didn't mention so far that training program that we set up, which Louis mentioned earlier. We realized, and I explain in a second who I address with us, we thought we want to learn ourselves how to craft learning, training units to address these issues also for the not big guys and not big markets. Us is the foundation here that Louis heads, the Federation of European Publishers with Enrico Turin, who is here, with Belletrina, a cultural organization and very nice publishing company in Slovenia, and with the Lithuanian Publishers Association. We thought together we do not want to be a competition or do things better, but different than the established schools. We thought, let's try for us to set up a little learning process for 1.5 years, sponsored by European funding under Creative Europe. And let's try to identify a number of these topics that I emphasized, which are the real challenges that we need to address and where we need to learn innovative skills, where we need to learn about new processes. And let's try to find a formula where we can share experiences from big organizations across the board and give that to the small organization. That was the reason why, when we wrote the application in October and November 2019, so before the pandemic, we said, oh, we are going to do a lot of these trainings online because that allows us to bring interviews, talks, etc., from the big guys, and we want that our trainees from the small organizations do not need to get out of their work process for a week or for 3 days, but just plug in for an hour or a few hours and are with us in a working group. And that is SIDT, which stands, very complicated title, always with EU projects, by the way, sustaining cultural diversity in literary translation in books or something like this. SIDT, you find all the details online, SIDT-books.eu for Europe. And we defined 4 training modules about very basic concepts of learning innovation, like design thinking, focusing on the user experience in online, and all the way through to how to handle very complex product creations with ebooks and audiobooks and different ways of distribution, with focusing also on accessibility, you know, all these new regulations that you need to apply for your website, etc. And we ran twice all these 4 training modules, just with one goal in mind, aside from our trainees, where we hoped that they would like it. We wanted to learn how to do, how to organize, what to respect, what to bear in mind to organize that kind of training. And the learnings for us were, it's a bit more tricky than we thought at the beginning. First, no surprise, you need to be careful about how to build curricula properly on such topics. But the much more challenging thing is how to engage in an online learning situation with the trainees, what to moderate, how to build bridges, etc. Collaboration is again one of those really difficult things where we fall through very easily. And therefore, José Manuel, we emphasize and we share your belief in the importance of collaboration. And we think salvation is near, not by the fact that we created everything so nicely with SIDT, but because the pandemic, the very complicated challenges of the industry, brings it almost unavoidably about that people are a little bit more interested in starting to find these works, these approaches of collaboration, put them in place, spend the time and the learning that is required. And therefore, for us, for our group, we also decided to try to move on, and we just send a new application to Brussels, and I hope for the next 4 years, when we win that application, and I'm always very positive, no disaster here, we can report to you what we found in the second implementation phase of SIDT books. Thank you very much.